Alright, so I'm here to convince you that video games are art, right? Well, sort of. See, our project is the relationship between video games and art, not video games as art. Now, that might sound nitpicky, but this is relevant, I assure you. Just give me a minute. So why exactly did Jacob and I do this in the first place? Well, as you may have guessed by now, my comrade and I are super nerds. Not just nerds, super nerds. While this fact is strange, it is relevant. Jacob and I share one common interest, video games. But not in the typical high school bro, gotta play Call of Duty and Madden kind of way. More like a, I think this has genuine artistic merit kind of way. But not everyone sees things like that. Most people pass off video games as mindless hobbies, or even something that's detrimental to the development of children, in some cases, so in our case, it's simply difficult to stand by and watch things we consider to be considered masterpieces be dismissed so easily as nothing more than a waste of time. We do genuinely think video games are art, and we'll tell you why, but this video isn't going to try to convince you of anything. It's to make you think about things. So here's a quick breakdown of what's going on exactly. Gaming is now at the height of its popularity due to the rise of mobile gaming, social gaming, and the accessibility of console and PC gaming. However, how often do you see something like video games being put up on a pedestal as the pinnacle of artistic achievement? Odds are, not often. In fact, odds are, not at all. One thing that's often brought up is the inadequate comparison scenario. When someone brings up that video games can't be art, they'll say something along the lines of, you'd really call something like Galaga or Dig Dug art? First off, it goes to show how incredibly outdated this mindset is. I don't compare cave paintings to the new Tomb Raider and say that paintings cannot be art. Not all games are art, just like not all movies, books, and drawings are art. You're gonna tell me that Transformers 2 is in the same league as Citizen Kane, Psycho, Birth of a Nation, Gone with the Wind, and To Kill a Mockingbird? Because if you are, then you're silly, and very strange. It's like comparing snack food to a gourmet meal. One is made for quick enjoyment, and the other is made for careful consumption and appreciation. I'd say games like Call of Duty are the snack foods of video games, and games like Metal Gear Solid are the gourmet meals. What's the difference between the two? Well, one is a semi-realistic, jingoistic, overly patriotic war simulator that is made to appeal to millions of white Americans, and the other is a thoughtfully crafted melodrama of wartime that goes into a slight character study of a veteran soldier. Another key difference between the two? You've probably heard of Call of Duty because of its massive popularity, and Metal Gear Solid? Its sales figures dwindle in comparison. See, this is the stuff we're talking about, that junk food games are always most people see when they look at games. But games that take risk and have something to say about things are oft ignored by non-game masses. And that's a shame. It removes some credibility from an already shifty industry.
But enough negativity. What we want to do here is highlight what games are and the positives of them, rather than what they aren't and the negatives. So we have to get this out of the way with what the definition of art is exactly. If you want to be all literal and boring, it is the expression of thoughts, ideals, concepts, and emotions captured in a specific medium. But that's long and wordy, so an easier way of putting it is representation of an idea or message through a medium. It's the ability to create conceptual beauty or relay a message which is true. This is difficult because art is very subjective and really varies from person to person, but this is as abstract and literal as I can get here, so just roll with me.
Let's use an example of common cinema to demonstrate a point here. Take the movie To Kill a Mockingbird, which I mentioned earlier. And even before we were required to read this for English class, this movie was always a huge favorite of mine. This movie is pretty well regarded by both moviegoers and critics, but why is that exactly? Just calling it art isn't explanation enough, we need an actual reason. Well, it's probably a lot to do with the performances, the well-written dialogue, the cinematography. All are good, but the best reason is most commonly found with its message. Normally, racism is a pretty cut and dry thing. Everyone knows it's bad and that racists are mean people who we shouldn't like, correct? Well, yeah, but this movie takes it a step further by showing us what racism does, how it corrupts, how it ruins, and how it can destroy the life of one man and everything he loves. It goes in depth and makes a normal message much more multidimensional. It helps us relate, empathize, and take away from movies' overall messages. That's it, the message. That's what's important.
So what have we got so far? Well, we know art is provocative, it invokes emotion, a sense of relatability, and an overall sense of questioning what you know. Now there are probably two camps of people listening to this. One camp is the, I'm still not convinced, tell me how Mrs. Pac-Man is art, and the, alright, I see what you mean group. Either way, let's get down with some examples. See, my partner and I have taken making examples of one of our favorite games to show why we're so passionate on this topic. We've picked games that were relevant to our thesis, so here it goes.
In my humble opinion, one of the best games in recent years that demonstrates how well concepts fit inside games is the 2007 title BioShock. On the outside, BioShock is a thematically structured survival horror game that takes place in an underwater dystopia, appropriately named Rapture. But on the inside, BioShock is a game about what it means to be human, and it's a commentary on the political view known as objectivism, as well as a commentary on video games themselves. The game's creator, Ken Levine, cites the novel Atlas Shrugged for the central concepts in this game, about a man who decides to abandon society and create a land of unbiased, unbridled political ideology. This man in BioShock is named Andrew Ryan, and serves as one of the game's central antagonists. Andrew Ryan is one of my personal favorite fictional villains, as he is a man who sought to form his own society based on his own principles, and tries to salvage his utopia, but, in the process, becomes a power-hungry man on the verge of insanity. What does this have to do with objectivism, you ask? And by extension, Atlas Shrugged, though? Well, the woman who wrote Atlas Shrugged was named Ayn Rand. And what is the name of our game's antagonist again? That's right, Andrew Ryan. Well, it turns out that Andrew Ryan is an anagram for We Are Ayn Rand. That's clever, huh? BioShock depicts the ideals of Miss Rand by showing that objectivism was a good idea in theory, but in execution it was deeply flawed. With nothing to keep humans in check, science, politics, and our own humanity could be jeopardized. The halls of Rapture are haunting, dark, and sad, to represent how the road to hell is paved with good intentions, so to speak. It creates a fictionalized society in which people become so removed from themselves that beauty is all they care about, and selfishness turns ordinary people into literal monsters. It's a great example of a political statement being made in a game, as well as a statement about human nature.
Little girl. The Walking Dead by Telltale Games is an example of why video games are capable of being high art. It's an emotionally driven, the story is easy to follow, you can easily fall in love with the characters, and it has some of the best voice acting I've ever heard. Well, let's discuss the game. The game shows a lot of thought and skill went into the writing. The writing and dialogue flows together so beautifully in each passing episode, it would make you think it had only one writer. All the writers' different styles play off perfectly and don't miss a single point. It's smart and is actually potentially realistic in how people would really react in these situations, like the loss of a family member or being forced to make tough decisions about life and death. You believe every word the characters say and wouldn't ever doubt them. The visual design is also very appealing. Telltale created a very atmospheric game that would show us what our world would look like if the dead actually took over. The design is not only original, but it's also very faithful to the source material. The game is based on the Walking Dead comic book series by Robert Kirkman. However, it doesn't really tie into it that much outside of just taking place in the same universe. Anyways, what I mean by that is the game actually looks like a 3D comic book with a cel-shaded graphic style, which was a very nice touch that I would say. The story, while not very original, is made up for it in execution. A convicted criminal named Lee Everett is on his way to prison when the cop driving the car hits a walker, and only Lee survives the impact of the crash. He later stumbles upon an 8-year-old girl named Clementine. The two of them then form a father-daughter type relationship as they meet up with other survivors and try to survive the apocalypse. While the story set may not sound like much, it goes through many interesting twists and turns. Throughout the story of each episode, it's almost impossible not to enjoy. The characters are also something that this game really shines at. You can control Lee to be whoever you want him to be, through dialogue options that can affect the way other characters feel about you. But aside from that, he also goes through a very depressing stages in episodes 1 and 5 that I don't want to spoil, and it's really hard not to feel sorry for him. Clementine is one of the only kid characters in all of media that I don't hate. Why? Because she's not annoying. You really care about her, and she actually affects the way you play, like choosing not to kill someone that deserves to be offed will actually make you have a more stable relationship with her. Other survivors that have key roles are Kenny and Ben. Kenny's role is somewhat of a close friend to Lee, that as once Kenny loses his family, it's hard for him to keep going, but because Lee and Clem need him, he sticks it out and he helps the folks that he cares about that also care about him in return. Finally, the main antagonist of the game, while serves as a threat, he isn't really a villain and doesn't even have a name. He's just identified as the Camp Man. His motivations are really believable and make you feel sorry for him. The villain in the game's sequel, William Carver, serves as a much better antagonist in a villain-type role. but by far the best aspect of the entire game is the decision making. The game truly goes all out when trying to make you think if you were really in these situations, like choosing which friend to help out over another, or letting someone fall to his death and die, or pulling him to safety. Your decisions actually affect what certain characters will think about you, and this can affect whether they'll stand by you in the end or not. It even has a statistic poll at the end of each episode, showing where you stand with the decisions that other players made.
Ironically, out of all this nerdy blabbing, I'm not even at the main point yet, but hold on, I won't waste your time much longer. Tell me, think for a moment, what is the absolute, all-encompassing common denominator that all art has? Take a guess. Go on. What is it then? Well, if you guessed artist, you are correct. Paintings have painters, movies have directors, books have authors, and like all other forms of art, games most definitely have an artist behind them. What exactly goes into a typical game? Just programming and lines of code, right? Nope, that's only one of a million things that goes into game design. First, you need a concept. What kind of game? A platformer? A 3D platformer? A shooter? A puzzle game? An RPG? An RTS? A MOBA? An adventure game? Or do you want to blend genres and make something more unique? Do you want it to be visually based or story based? Stories are another interesting aspect of games. See, they've become gradually more cinematic, and have become similar to movies in the way they relay storytelling. They have voice actors and motion capture, much like real actors, teams of writers, planners, and producers. The effort placed into games like The Last of Us is just as much as you'd see in any typical blockbuster, if not more, because of the animation and animators that inevitably come with games.
Animation is actually a huge aspect of games. It defines the game's style, its rules, and boundaries. What, those people behind computers? That's not that much work. Well, see, it's not exactly that simple. To design the environment of a game, it's not just wham, bam, here's a cool utopia in the sky. You have to actually build every aspect of the universe, incorporate things into the story, design enemies, abilities, environments, all from nothing. You have to make sure it all goes together, make it all in concept, maps, and drawings, 3D model it to see what it will look like, model it on your computer, animate every single body for animation and movement cycles, sync up the voice, acting with lip movement, and congrats, you have one character out of about 600. Yeah, sounds like a lot, that's because it is. Every building, every collectible, every obstacle, every action and movement you take or more is designed by people who want to meticulously craft an enjoyable, profound experience.
That sounds like a lot of work, right? And a lot of creative effort, right? But it's all crafted by a ton of people in boardrooms. Well, not really. Here, this is the entire reason I made this video, and my friend here helped. The artists. Meet Ed McMillan, a game designer for several games like Super Meat Boy and The Binding of Isaac, two games filled with creative genius. He was in a little documentary called Indie Game the Movie, and I feel this truly showcases his passion and love for what he does. He wants to create a fun, challenging game that has its own unique style because he loves games and wants to create and shape the childhoods of gamers everywhere. He is presented with obstacle after obstacle, trial after trial, be it raising money to publish the game, design quirks, creative blocks, and just general overworking. You see this guy struggle just to make a fun piece of entertainment that he's passionate about. It's actually kind of touching to see someone so passionate about what they're doing and what they love so much, and face so many problems in their way. And there are people like McMillan everywhere, people who just want to make entire games by themselves, who go through the creative struggle and process just to make people happy or show off their imagination that they have by letting you be enveloped in a world. So, after all that, what should you take from this? Are games art? Have I convinced you? Whatever the answer, I can say one thing for certain. It doesn't matter. I may be someone that can use lots of big words to convince people to share my opinion, but that doesn't change the state of affairs, does it? What we want is for games to be taken seriously. To be taken as art, well, we'll go in baby steps, and any progression we see for the medium we love so dearly is nice enough for us. I just want to see a world where people like Ed McMillan, Jonathan Blow, and Phil Fish are recognized for their creative genius and talent, their passion for what they do. Are video games art, you ask me? I'd like to think so. In fact, I do think so. But I guess it doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, video games are beautiful and creative representations of the inner workings and imaginations of the minds of people from all over the world. Is that art? Maybe. But whatever games are, I hope they stay that way, the same beautiful pieces of interactive enjoyment they've been since my childhood.